Well, good morning. It's Wednesday, October 16th. And today we were just going to have an open dialogue, but Sam agreed to come talk a little bit more, maybe give us an update on some of the work he's been doing or some reflections he's had since his book was released. We haven't talked specifically about what we're going to talk about today, so anything goes. But Sam, we kind of skimmed over your book the first time. It's filled with so much information and uh, local facts and stories, and just don't want to lose sight of that gem that you've created, and you've involved a lot of people from our region in that. Some of whom can't make it to these dialogues, but like Bridget Booth, who environmental educator who's been involved, and the tie to environmental education is pretty significant. So we could just revisit it a little bit. I'll hand it over to you if there's anything particular you wanted to mention, and then of course we can open it up for anything else people want to talk about.
Well, thanks, Leroy. Since you mentioned this to me, I guess in a text yesterday. So, I had about a couple hours this morning to prepare. And so really what maybe most of you know, I've got a presentation this evening at the historic village. I guess it's in the chapel. So I do have a show ready for that, but I don't think I want to put that out here this morning. In case anybody here might be coming tonight, there's no need to see it twice. But what I'm really kind of hoping too is that this isn't necessarily a formal presentation. It would be more of a dialogue throughout. So if people, particularly if you've read it, if you've had a chance to skim it at least, and if you have any comments or questions, as I'm blabbing here, those are really welcome, because whatever you bring today, could be helpful for me this evening as well. So with that, I'll just I'm going to share a screen though, Leroy, if that's okay. If I can figure that out again, let's see.
Yeah, you should be able to.
That should be a blank screen for now, and then I'll just occasionally put something on there. So,
it's not shared yet.
Oh, it's not shared yet? Okay. Let me start over again. Oh, I know, I gotta hit the share button.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. Yep, that's the key. Share button. This is a kind of an important graphic in the book, showing the geographical context of what the Hazlet area looked like in the 1960s. And something that I think it was last week, or was it the drain commissioner? What was his name again, Leroy?
Pat Lindeman.
Yeah, Pat brought up in his early conversation the idea that back in the early 1800s, maybe even 1700s, that this area, well, the Red Cedar was a creek, right? That's what he said, and it really didn't have a lot of tributaries into it. He didn't go into detail about this area, but what I surmised from what he said is that Mud Lake Drain probably didn't exist. This is probably a man-made feature, that was trenched out to drain the area of farmlands. This drain actually wanders quite a ways off to the east, and so which is a lot of farmland out in this area. So probably that was a man-made thing, and likewise, Tyhart drain probably wasn't there. Maybe the outlet to Lake Lansing was there. I don't know, but regardless, both of these, the Tie Hard Drain and the Lake Lansing outlet come together over here off the map and end up dumping into what was the Red Cedar Creek at that time, which explains to me sort of a mystery about Mud Lake that, Peter, this was maybe 3 or 4 years ago that you and I think I called you up when you were working at the MSU for the old botanical garden, and it kind of asked you if you had any idea about whether or not the swamp around Mud Lake was a bog or a marsh. And I think you might even said that you went out there to look at the plants a little bit and maybe noticed, somebody told me that they noticed pitcher plant in a couple of locations, and a few other acid loving plants, which would start to indicate that it was a bog. And when we were kids, in the summertime, you really could slip through and be up, neck deep if you're not careful in the right spots. So it seemed to resemble a bog, but then based on the science of the research and all the stuff that I've been involved with understanding the difference between bogs and marshes, the water bodies that have inlets and outlets typically are more alkaline water than, for the water body itself, than acidic. What happens if you don't have an inlet and an outlet, you just get rainwater, it tends to be more acidic, and that's what starts off this natural process of eutrophication that forms either a bog eventually or a marsh. And so that's where, because this has an inlet and an outlet, it would make more sense that it's a marsh rather than a bog, but it sort of seems kind of boggy. And so this idea that the drain commissioner brought forward kind of sort of unravels that mystery in my mind, that maybe it started out developing as a bog in the early days before we had the Mud Lake drain, before the inlet and before the outlet was there. And it started because of the more acidic nature, started to eutrophiate in a more acidic way, and creating these bog, mats, floating mats that kind of come out from the bank, and certainly this could have been started way back here. This thing could very well much been a bigger water body and filled in over time to where it's really quite small now. Kind of on its last leg for its life when it comes right down to it. I mean, not that we're going to see the end of it in our lifetime, but geologic time, it's going to be short-lived from here on out, I'm guessing. So I don't know, and I guess, Peter, I don't know what you think about that theory. Does that make sense?
Yes, and in my mind, it does.
Well, that kind of makes me sleep easier, because I was always wondering about this.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know if that's of interest to you guys, but it really it's sort of based on what the drain commissioner said last week, it really helps me understand this area better.
Do we know when drains were kind of first put in? Would that be in the probably sometime in the 1800s, right, or not?
No,
Yeah, that's a good question, John. I don't know. I'm guessing as well, if you look at the history here, Obed Marshall came to the area in 1836. And then it started to, really develop when James Hazlitt came and started the park here. That was when Hazlitt sort of came alive. The spiritualist came, but then farming really took off as well. So probably I'm just gonna guess late 1800s, and then even into probably the early 1900s. I'm just guessing, but it would make sense in my mind. They didn't all happen at once, I'm sure. But that's all really interesting history in Mud Lake, because it's really a thin book. It may be, it is sort of packed with a lot of information, but it is really a lot of different kinds of information. So it just kind of presents headlines on all these topics. So there's a lot more. There's a lot more people want to, it's kind of just cracks doors into areas of research that people could go into. One of them, I'll just maybe bop forward. Let's see if that works. The other thing that was really interesting to me too, as I learned more about the area, this whole, as a kid, we knew there was this interurban connection. I just blew up the label here, but this map that was developed in 1913 called out this stop on the interurban as Hazlitt Park. If you can't read it, but that's what it says there. Hazlitt really wasn't a place. It was just a formal, it certainly wasn't a municipality by any means. I'm not sure what the status of Meridian Township was in 1913, but it was a stop on the interurban, which really interesting, connected all of Southeast Michigan with this electric train that just went by the wayside in the mid 1900s as the roads were developed for the automobile, and people just thought it was easier to hop in their car and go places that way than to, meet the schedule of this electronic train, which unfortunately put a lot of, kind of a big wet blanket on the whole electric era of the time. There was electric cars there too in the early 1900s, but with Henry Ford developing this idea of manufacturing, mass manufacturing, and could spit out these gasoline vehicles so much quicker, it was just so much more economical to go in that direction, which just changed history, right? So there's so much of the history. Again, this is just one of the topics in the book that is brought up, but there's so much more. There really is. I'm gonna back out of this real quick. Unless there's somebody wants to add, certainly just jump in about this whole electric train thing. For us in those days, the remnants of it I'll back up a little bit here. The remnants of the interurban was out here alongside the railroad track, just between the pines, what we call the pines, which is really a grove of Norway spruce, a dense grove. And it's full of condominiums now, if you've ever been out there. But if you could imagine almost full-grown Norway spruce trees, that once you get into it, there's little pathways and ways to get around, little clearings, little openings. It's truly a natural maze, so a great playland area. But just to the north, this is all wetlands. I mean, standing water along the tracks. Probably in some places, who knows, 6 feet deep or more of water. But the remnants of the interurban were there as when we were kids, and made a great challenge to jump from the supporting beams that maybe were 5 feet apart or so. I don't, it's hard to say when you're, thinking back in those days. It seemed like a long ways to jump from one to the other. And if you didn't make it, you're up to your neck again, in duckweed water that you can't see anything, and who knows how many snakes are in there. So it was a exciting place to wander in. A lot going on right, right in that area. I'm gonna go to another image here. It's gonna take me a second to get to it. All right, this one, as I alluded to here a minute ago, Mud Lake, it really, I have to maybe almost apologize for how it has so much going on that doesn't seem to relate. And if you read this book like most people do, not overnight or within a couple of days, you might put it down for a week and then come back to it and read a couple of pages. I can imagine that you kind of get lost because it's hard to remember, when you put it down exactly what happened when you read it the last time, and how so many of these topics don't seem to relate. But in quite honestly, in writing it, I had no idea where it was going when I started. It just started out about the first thing I was excited about was these stories about the kids that grew up around Mud Lake and how great it was to have those natural features. So we had these stories about them, and as it turned out, that book was really thin. It was maybe 20 pages, and it wasn't even a book. So that's where I felt it really important to bring in my friends like Beth Hagenboo and Terry Sack, and some of them, Steve Armstrong. Some of these guys I didn't even list as collaborators. It was just fun to talk to them about it. And Chris Early in particular, he's another a great storyteller that brought a lot of his ideas, and Mark Nimfy certainly to the book. So those stories started to get more of, and then in the meantime, while that was developing, I was thinking about other things to write about, and that's where I started thinking more about the wetland science end of it, the environmental science of it. And they were all just separate ideas. So, and of course, there's more of the humanistic things, the social justice. There's a good chapter about that it gets sort of spiritual again, not from a religious standpoint so much, but more just about the spirit of life itself. So it gets some of that gets really deep, and it doesn't really seem to relate. But there's bottom line, there's this at least one circle spinning around of human things, and then there's this science stuff, and it all revolves around the circular energy concept. That's a whole chapter in itself too, that talks about the natural circles. I mean, obviously the planets, and then there's the stuff here on Earth with the water cycle and the carbon cycle, and then of course then it gets crazy, just emphasizing the carbon cycle, and that gets into the whole carbon budget and climate change. So after we were all done making these stories with the collaborators, then the idea was how to make sense out of it and how to put them together as a book, because they weren't, it wasn't a book, it was just a bunch of stories. So we had to try to sequence them into some kind of order that makes sense, and then transition them. So there was a lot of editing to make one chapter relate to the next chapter. So that's just a little bit about how it came about. And I guess, and that's where I joke about it when I say it took me 15 times to read it before I started to get it, because it doesn't, in one quick read, you're actually, it's not usually a quick read, right? It might take you a week with all, because nobody has, who's read a book this summer? I haven't had a chance to read a book. And so I'm guessing most people, if they've even looked at this, they might have maybe started it and not even finished it. So that's, people are so busy. But that's a little bit why it, if you do read it, it wanders around a lot, because it wasn't written originally as a book. It was a lot of separate things that we had to figure out how to piece together.
Hey, Sam, I think the wandering is actually one of the strengths of the book because so many times we get focused on a certain area or this area or whatever, and yeah, like you say, you're wandering around, but it gives you insights into, I guess, relationships with you've got the focus with Mud Lake, which kind of ties it all together, but I think that's can be useful to have a book that kind of does some wandering because it helps kind of see how things relate to each other.
Well, that's good to hear, John. I appreciate that. Because for me, it's hard to really get a grip on what other people how people may perceive, because to me, I see this kind of a menagerie that maybe no, it doesn't make sense, and that scares me a little bit. But I'm glad to hear your comment there. Thanks.
Well, sometimes sometimes people are their thinking is linear, and sometimes it's I forget the other term where it's all over the map sort of thing. But I've got a question for you. There was some going to be some books that were given to the schools in the library, I guess. Did that happen already, or is that yet to come?
That happened. It happened well sometime in the summer. I can't tell you which month, but certainly Hazlitt has several, and Okemos. I had a brief conversation with the librarian at Okemos schools now, the schools, and they were, as this is normal, but they were very cautious. They wanted to review it before they put it on their shelves. And so I sent them one to review, and I never heard back. But I think they ended up getting a couple as well. I mean, we put together a list. Whether they're on their shelves or not, I don't know at Okemos, but they do have them. East Lansing has them, and they were, we did get a strong thank you note from them. So I know they're on their shelves there. The capital area libraries, and I'm trying to think of his last name as I'm talking here, and I can't think of it, but Tom, the head librarian there, who was involved with Holly, and her last name, is it Cordill at the, yeah, okay, I see Leroy shaking his head. So they are the people I've been coordinating with for this event this evening. And Tom sounds pretty excited about the book too, so I think it's on their shelves. So it's played in some of the Lansing, the state library has it. It's scattered around. So there's some down in Detroit, in Wyandotte as well. They're all over the place. We got one up here. I got one copy up here in, or maybe two in Tawas as well. So, and that worked out great. That was funded by the Green Grant program to get those books out. I don't know how many there was in the end that were delivered. There's whatever was left in the budget. They just bought a bunch of books and sent them out. And I never really did see the final list as to where environmental loss sent the books. Oh, and some of them went to Bridget. I think 10 went to Bridget for her distribution with a workshop that she put on this summer with the teachers with her place-based education program to get people up to speed and about that. And of course, the book, I mean, the place-based education program, I'm sure everybody's sort of familiar, but you know, the goal there is to incorporate local history and environmental or natural features of the area into the school curriculum at every on every topic. So you know, I mean, as an example, I'll just make this up, but you know, you can talk about math, and 3 wetlands times 6 wetlands is 18 wetlands or something like that, you know. But the idea is to incorporate that language and heritage into every part of the curriculum. And it helps to instill a pride in your community and a deeper, you know, a more depth in the whole educational process. Easier, it makes it more exciting to understand. And I'll just, as an example, I never did well in math. That was my worst subject. You know, you get into these algebraic equations and numbers are just not exciting to me. You know, it just never, I couldn't keep my interest. I lose track in the middle of a problem. But so when I went to college and thought I was going to be a veterinarian and had to take calculus and flunked the first time and got a D the second time, well, that was enough science, math for me. I had to move into the studio with the colored pencils and magic markers with landscape architecture. But then there was a class in landscape architecture where we were doing a little bit of engineering and developing road alignment, both horizontally and vertically. And a vertical curve in a road is not a true arc. It's a parabolic arc, and I didn't know this. You know, I was going into it, but it's a radius that changes as you go. That was interesting to me. And then there's to figure out on a graph paper, you know, a section or an elevation of that road, that curve, in order to develop it, you had to use a calculus formula to draw that curve. And that was the first time I could understand anything about calculus. Is it had some meaning to it. You know, you start to put something visual to the math, and then it's not just numbers. So that's the kind of thing that the place-based education, I think, is important, because it brings home where you live and it helps you to understand all the subjects in a much better way. Fun stuff.
I love that, and so needed, it seems to me, in our educational system. Have sort of this connected learning, place-based learning, natural systems learning. And maybe it's different than when I was a kid, but it seems like part of the issue is relates to what you mentioned earlier about sort of this complicated story and how things weave together in unpredictable ways. And it's hard to describe linearly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of circles that are overlapping and connected and interconnected, which is, I mean, it kind of gets into that whole chapter with circular energy. So all these circles, it's not just one circle, it's a lot of, it's a system of circles that are, and this gets a little bit on the edge of danger. I think I'm going to talk a little bit about.
Go for it.
The book does not put any of this in anybody's face. You know, it just talks about these circles, and it does mention, I think, one time the circle of life, where you know, you got this material matter, you know, just elements of the earth that are put together in a way that all of a sudden move around and reproduce and do all these things. And then they die, and the life goes away, but it then comes back. You know, maybe it happened in their offspring, and it just keeps on going. So there's this circle of life of material coming out of the ground and doing stuff, and then going back into the ground. So there's stuff that makes that happen, like water and air, that has the basics that supports this life. And water, and that's Mud Lake. This, you know, I'm going to go all over the place here, but Mud Lake, you think of Mud Lake as an entity, but it's really, it's everywhere. It's all over the world. It's the same. The water is connected. Mud Lake's connected, like we said, to the Red Cedar River, to the Lake Michigan, and, you know, wraps around and it goes into the ocean. It goes all over the place, but it's all one thing. And likewise, the air, we're breathing the same air that China's breathing right now. It's all the same stuff. So I didn't really get, I guess, overly detailed, but, you know, there was I think a closing statement in that chapter about, you know, these books that we rely on for guidance that seem to be culturally different in different places, but they all say the same thing. It's just that each area has their own version, but it all comes down to you know, brotherhood and all the stuff that helps to keep our species alive. But because they're different, there's enough differences that it causes friction between, just like what's going on right now in the Middle East, right? So those books are great that they're written by men and help guide us through, you know, thousands of years. But once we understand what, I don't know if you want to call it God or whatever it is that we can see every day that's happening right in front of us, if that becomes more important than these minor differences in these books, then some of this friction could potentially go away, and we would be doing things like other critters to preserve our species. And I'm gonna, I guess I gotta go to another slide here. Let's just see here if I can make that work. Oops, that's not it. Sorry, it's close. Yeah, this one. So, you know, Mud Lake, again, through storytelling, talks about a couple of incidences in the neighborhood that they're not, I mean, certainly Hazlitt did not have the racial problems that some of the larger cities like Detroit had, but it's still there. It still is today, where there were a couple of, actually a trio of Asians that came to Mud Lake, and their style of fishing was not what everybody else thought was normal. And they were kind of ridiculed, and before long, they just left the lake. And likewise, there was a story about an African-American family that came house shopping on Biscayne Way, and after they left, one of their kids borrowed one of the bikes and just had a great time riding up and down the road for 10 minutes or 5 minutes while his parents were looking at the house. And of course, that sparked, after they left, a bunch of negative conversation in the neighborhood. And I think in the end, Beth Hagenboo's mother ran down to the house where there was this meeting going on and straightened them all out. She did it in a very polite way and kind of squelched the problem right there, then and there. But so yeah, that you got to read the story to understand that. So there's those kind of stories then that relate to a little bit now to this whole spiritualism idea. Again, not so much from religion, but more how people can embrace the environment. And then there's this whole study that's brought up that the Fetzer Institute put together. They're a group in Kalamazoo about spiritualism and whether people what it is to them, or do they believe in God? And some people don't believe in God at all, but they still consider themselves spiritual. And most people that consider themselves spiritual want to serve their community. That seems to be a common thread. At least that's what was found in this study. So, and then how that relates to this one little quote from like one of the interviews in that study. This: every time I see a certain animal, like a butterfly, that's a really small spiritual experience. Because to me, they're just so interesting how they have short lives, but their whole lives are spent with a purpose for making sure their species stays alive. Now that is that's spiritual. The idea that each species is working to preserve their place in this world. And so you can see where these some of the stuff that's going on today with the hate that we're seeing in the Middle East and in our own country kind of goes against the grain of that kind of spiritualism. So again, it sort of cracks another door that you could take that anywhere you want, but the book does not go into detail. It lets you kind of put your own mind to it.
Well, thank you. This is a great sort of follow-up to your talk 7 or 8 months ago, and maybe the one that you're giving tonight, where you go into a little bit more of the chronology and the detail about the book. Encourage people to tune in this evening. And what other comments do people have, or questions or insights? We're just blown away by all the depth of this subject matter. It's hard to.
Well,
I
Go
guess
ahead.
for me, I guess for me, when you're talking about that last comment, it actually for me is the same thing. For me, I see it as the hatred that's going on is actually also trying to keep their own species alive, keep their own race alive, keep their own culture alive. And I don't know if that I don't know, I guess for me, it's trying to keep the status quo. And in doing that, is a prevalence of continuing with hate. So that's my pushback on that.
That's really interesting, Sarah. And I haven't even thought about that, but I think you're absolutely right. What's going on, you're right, is there really are trying to preserve their own culture.
Mhm.
And that unfortunately, that's where we're not really there yet globally to understand that we're all really one species.
Mhm.
And it's unfortunate that we're not there yet, but and I don't know when that's going to happen, how we're going to get there. And who knows, I mean, certainly if you look at um other animals in the world, they have disputes. They're not always on friendly basis, even within their own species. Um, but so so maybe it is natural for us to do this. Who knows? It certainly has been going on for a long time.
Mhm.
Seems to me like there are fear-based responses and there are more compassionate responses. There's healthy and there's unhealthy responses. Seems to me like a lot of the negativity comes from the fear-based responses. Um, Maybe that's an oversimplification, but I think I like the idea of nature as a teacher and looking at how nature, of course, nature can be interpreted by many different ways, but one of the things I like about this subject matter and the book is that you bring together just a lot of the related elements of the social and natural systems. And it's just good food for thought.
I'm gonna turn it down.
Up.
Did you want to say something, Peter?
Oh, I'm talking to Linda over my shoulder here. But I did want to ask Sam, if at any point you ever got a chance to talk to a teacher in Hazlitt, Robert Copeland. He was the
Yes.
outdoor education person for Hazlitt schools.
Sure. Robert Copeland, in fact, was a teacher of mine when I was in junior high school. So I think he was he was a gym teacher for me in 6th grade. And what I remember most about him was teaching us square dancing at lunchtime. We had, after we got our food down, we got to get out there and do the do-si-do, and he had the records going. And so we were doing all that stuff under Bob Copeland's direction.
Right.
So yeah, he's a great guy.
How do you know him, Peter?
Well, when I first met my wife, Linda, she was Linda Copeland, married to Bob Copeland's oldest son, Rob. So they were like my honorary in-laws for years. And
He
she,
was actually my neighbor, lived in Ottawa Hills,
oh, good.
just around the corner here. He and his wife.
Yeah. So
On Halloween, my kids would always want to go there because she made best popcorn, homemade popcorn, and handed
yes,
that out rather than candy. He also had a lot to do with Waldemar Nature Center, I understand.
Yes.
The inception of Waldemar. Yep.
good.
Kidding.
Well, but I think too, he was involved with the construction of the log cabin.
Very much.
Yeah, that was part of an educational or an outdoor education program that he and Jane Taylor were heading
that-
up.
Yes,
And Jane Taylor then later got involved with this children's garden idea. And she, together with Deb Kinney, who lives in Hazlet, kind of on the north side, again, in a very natural area, put together the plans for the children's garden at Michigan State University,
yes,
which is a huge success and basically ignited an idea. The whole children, I mean, they are really the credited. You know, Jane is credited for the idea, the children's garden concept,
yes.
which went all over the United States. I'll show you photo here of one. Let's see. I'm going to go back to the share screen thing. And then this whole thing with Jane Taylor and others, you know, Nancy Croupiars, Tom Wywoody, Rod Hagenboo, the Warbox, they're you know, all these people that lived around Mud Lake or near Mud Lake, that so many of them turned out to be environmental champions. So this image, oh, let's have to get back to that one. This image shows Jane's Michigan State University garden that she and Deb Kinney put together. And then this other one is a couple of photos. These are just plans now that I actually worked with Jane and Deb Kinney on for a garden in Niagara Falls.
Wow.
That didn't get built, unfortunately, but it was a great idea. Again, you know, an adventure land with mazes and ponds and, you know, areas to learn about the Great Lakes. This is like a little elevated climbing platform. You can go up inside kind of a tree house and look down over a map of the Great Lakes made out of plants, you know, so it's just full of kid stuff that you don't have to there's no rules. You don't have to not touch. You can get in and play with it. So it's all fun stuff. Surprises along the way. And everything's to kid scale for them to get into, you know, it's all good. And then of course, this image shows Milt Barron's. Milt Barron was right there in Hazlet too. If I can get. Milt lived right here at the corner of Buckingham and Biscayne Way. Jane was right here on Biscayne. The Warbox, Oscar, who did all these great character cartoon and stories about nature in the DNR newsletter. And his son then, John Warbach, became a landscape architect and was part of the team to develop the Lake Lansing watershed management plan. So a lot of, for whatever reason, living in this area seemed to be a subliminal stimulus for people to go in a kind of an environmental direction. It's fun to think about it that way.
Sam, if you think back to when you were, you know, the 60s and growing up and today, is there just as much green space now in that area, or did a lot of area get developed so there's less green space? I know this is kind of a subjective kind of question, but I'm just curious, what's your sense? Is there about the same or quite a bit
It's-
less because of
It's
the,
considerably less. I'm gonna show you, this, going back to this, area this is during the 60s, but, so this woods right here, which is what we called the woods. And I mean, it's just a great place to play, is a whole neighborhood now. That's the trees. I mean, there's still a lot of trees there, but it's all carved out with you know, roads and everything that connect over to Wilkshire. When I first moved to Hazlet, when we were like, I guess I was 3 years old, we moved from East Lansing out there. Lakeview Heights, this neighborhood was brand new. Buckingham was when we moved into Buckingham Road, it was there was not a tree in the neighborhood. We, you know, we had a bunch of, we got together and my dad bought honey locusts with the whole street. They kind of agreed that would be the street tree, I guess, and so it started to get planted. But this, assuming, was farmland, maybe some woods. I don't know how far this woods encroached in that direction before, you know, or the early 1950s when this subdivision was built. Wilkshire was not there yet. That came a little bit later. This was really the old neighborhood of Hazlet. It was along Hazlet Road and this area southwest of Lake Lansing. Of course, the amusement park was there since the early 1900s. But this was Hazlet, and this came along in the 50s. This a little bit later, still probably in the late 50s. This is gone now, the woods. These pines are loaded with condominiums, as I said. There was some talk, it's not on this map, but about as we got a little older and hopped on bikes, we could ride out almost to East Lansing, right on the edge of East Lansing, to the Park Lake Road gravel pits that were surrounded by woodlands. That's all housing now around those gravel pits, it's gorgeous, you know, but it was not like that in 1970. It was, you know, these really clear ponds that were surrounded by woods, and what a place for teenagers to have fun. So yeah, it's less, I would have to say. This area, I think, is pretty much intact. You know, and you know, what used to be the O'Brien farm right here, excuse me, is now the high school. So there's some development in there, but they really haven't, they preserved this natural area.
But isn't that based because it's a wetland? I mean, to build
Oh
on.
yeah, it's a wetland. Yeah. Yeah,
It's
that's,
just not buildable unless you
it's
do mediation and move it and you're not, I mean, I don't know when the
absolutely.
laws went in that you couldn't mess with the wetland, but
Certainly, that's right, Sarah, that the wetland ordinances that were developed, basically, they're responsible for saving these kinds of properties.
mhm.
This woodland area is a bluff. It's high and dry. So that did get developed. Likewise, the pines got developed. So if there wasn't any regulations, the developers moved in, right? But this wetland is basically untouched. And now this area right here is one of the Meridian Township preserves that incorporates the Mud Lake drain. So that's off the table, which is good. Oh, you know,
When
we're looking at, go ahead.
you had the slide for Silent Spring, but you didn't talk about it. When that book came out and all that came to fruition and that spurred the Environmental Protection Agency and all that kind of stuff. Do you have any idea when the wetland ordinances went into effect? Like, was it part of that, you think?
I do have an idea when that happened. I don't have the exact time frame in my head, the dates in my head. I will say that it is talked about in there in the book about Rod Hagenbu. I'm going to stop this again and go to another image. Let's see. So Rod Hagenbu in the I'm not sure if it might have been in the 70s. And I believe Rod was on the township board. Another name some of you might know that is not mentioned in the book is Connect. And I'm trying to think of his first name. I know his son, Sam Connect, who was a few years ahead of me in high school, very brilliant guy. And his father, by the last name Connect, was also on the board, who I believe was working for the state of Michigan and in an environmental capacity. And these guys wanted to develop a floodplain ordinance in the early days, which couldn't get passed at the state level, but Rod was part of the team that basically drafted it with the first floodplain ordinance. That here's what it came down to is people started to realize that developing these wetlands was then all of a sudden causing other developments to flood. And what are we doing? What's wrong here? So they wrote this ordinance that said, well, if you're going to develop or fill into a flood area, you're going to have to compensate that with an equal amount of cut in order to make space for the 100-year storm. So that was the first movement toward protecting wetlands, and it really wasn't a true protection. It just said you had to kind of mitigate your cuts and fills. Since then, it was like the real wetland ordinance, and it's in the book. I'd have to, I just can't remember word for word, but was in the early 1990s or late 1980s, where there was a really strong protection of preserving wetlands, more than just cutting and filling. If you actually did anything in a wetland, you had to mitigate it by creating a totally new wetland of equal or more area. So that, and then even then it was questionable as if you could get away with it. So wetlands became very regulated. And this was not that long ago. It was the last part of the previous century, not the 60s, when that ordinance was developed. But this was the prelude to it, with what Rod Hagenbu's work was, just by compensating cut and fill. Which is not long ago.
We've covered a lot of ground, so to speak. Getting on close to the end of the hour. Are there topics that kind of related to this today? Do we want to continue the conversation next week? Any thoughts on future speakers or next topics of interest? Bruce? I thought I saw you unmute yourself, and I don't want to cut you off if you're still fleshing out an idea, Sam.
Yeah, I wanted to mention, oh, are we over time?
No, we have a few minutes.
Oh, do we? I
Um,
was going to say one more quick thing. And I just put this on to show. this whole, I forgot, I've been meaning to mention this for a while, but so here's the O'Brien farm, which is not much is mentioned in the book about the O'Briens, but I did tell you guys, my wife Sue was kind of well, in fact, the book was her idea to write it. And so she, you know, prodded me along the way with little ideas and so forth. But interesting fact about my wife Sue is that she probably wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for the O'Briens that owned the farm here. Because those guys, Ted O'Brien and his wife, I can't think of her name right now, but they were the people that introduced my wife Sue's mom and dad to each other, which was, you know, so if it wasn't for those guys, Paul and Shirley Stoddard would never have met, and then I would never have seen my wife. So it's interesting how little things like that within a community make other stuff happen. It's fun stuff.
Leroy, thinking of future speakers, I wonder if it'd be good to have Emma or somebody talk about the land preserves and what's going on, and maybe the Conservation Corps. Just kind of an update. I know they're doing a lot, so it'd be kind of maybe good to get what's the latest and greatest.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love to hear people's brainstorms about topics or particular speakers. Obviously, Sam has been beaming in from how many 100 miles away?
It's about 2.5 hours, whatever that is.
So we don't have to limit ourselves to the greater Lansing area. But I encourage you to think about people that you'd like to invite. Most of our Wednesdays are fairly open at this point. Sam, thank you so much for, again, sharing your time and your stories with us.
Glad to
And-
do it, Leroy.
And again, Sam will be presenting tonight. Can you give us just a quick snapshot of that details? Is there space left?
I don't know how they're doing this. I don't know if they took reservations or what, but it's 7 o'clock at the chapel. I'm gonna just show a PowerPoint and talk about it. Hopefully as informal as what we just did today. It'll be a little bit more. I mean, I'll show the whole series of images, but run through it with the idea that people can chat as we go. That's my idea anyway. We'll see how just like the book, we'll just play it by ear here and see what happens.
Well, this has been
Where is it going to be? I came in late, sorry.
It's at the historic village there by the Meridian Mall in the chapel.
Oh, okay, behind the township offices.
Yeah, in wherever the chapel is. I haven't been there myself, so I just know it's in at the historic village in the chapel by the mall. So
Thank
I'm gonna
you.
have to find it when I get close.
it's going to be a religious experience.
Do you know this building, Leroy?
Yeah, it's right next to the town hall, just a stone's throw.
Is there enough seating? I mean,
Oh,
how many-
I think there's plenty of seating.
Yeah.
So,
What time?
7 o'clock.
great. Well, again, if you have other ideas for speakers or topics, please share. And thank you for inspiring our imaginations, Sam. And I hate to shut things down here. So as long as somebody wants to speak, we can hang out. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Talk to you next week.